Hello, I'm Dr. Katherine Hayes. This is number 0760, the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File program, number 0760. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File program, you'll meet Marc Morton, who has written his first YA science fiction novel. This one is called The Headmasters. After years of writing nonfiction, did it seem daunting to become a fiction writer?
If anything, I would say it was kind of a relief. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I had written for nonfiction books. I really enjoyed doing them, but they were really grueling because I had to keep so much information in my head at the same time. Then my wife and I adopted 4 kids, and so when they finally got older and I was able to start writing again, I thought, I want to write fiction now. We had read so many books and young adult novels to the kids that I wanted to turn my hand to that. It really felt like a relief, or like, finally I can get back to this.
Diane Bator is the author of Written in Stone. What's the story with Allison, her protagonist?
Allison has memory issues. She's been on medication her whole life, but she really doesn't know why. She discovers that her father, who she thought was long dead, is still alive. And in around the same time, she gets an invitation to go to Vancouver Island to become a writer in residence. When she arrives there, she has this really bizarre sense of deja vu. And bit by bit, she starts to put things together and discovers a family she didn't know she had.
Marc Hartzman from WeirdHistorian.com is back with the Weird Story for the month. This one tries to answer the question of, what was the phenomenon? Was it UFOs or just swamp gas?
So this was a case that happened in Michigan. It was a series of UFO sightings beginning on March 14th, 1966. They were being investigated by Dr. J. Allen Hynek. He was the chief scientific investigator for Project Blue Book, and that was the Air Force's program to investigate UFO sightings. And there were more than 100 witnesses, and they saw these glowing objects that were drifting in the sky. They were zigzagging across. I mean, they were hovering above these swampy hollows that were near Ann Arbor. And again, this was going on for several nights.
And there's lots and lots of Stuff File news and, of course, an idiot of the day. The guest slater, the person who told you this was show number 0760, was Katherine Hayes, author of A Fifth of a Story. She was a guest on show number 0756, so you can go back and check out her visit on that show. Thank you very much, Katherine, for doing the guest slate on this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0760. Much appreciated. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. The 2024 Iditarod race in Alaska got off to a messy start. On the first day, musher Jesse Holmes went mano a mano with a moose that became aggressive towards his dogs on the trail. Holmes punched the moose in the nose and went on his way. Soon after, Dallas Seavey and his dogs came upon a moose. It's not clear whether it was the same one. That moose was threatening and belligerent.
Stand back, Mr. Moose, if you don't want to be hurt. You wouldn't dare!
When the moose got entangled with his dogs, Seavey dispensed with the heroics and shot it.
Now we shall see who has the upper hand.
As per the Iditarod's rules, Seavey then stopped for about 10 minutes to field dress the moose, but he was later assessed a 2-hour penalty at the next checkpoint because the animal was not sufficiently gutted by the musher. Okay, I'm a city kid and I have no idea how to field dress a moose. I assume you just give it pleats. Anyway, a third musher, Wally Robinson, ran across the moose carcass in the dark on a trail carving through woods. Race Marshal Warren Palfrey confirmed that, quote, "We are making sure that every attempt is made to utilize and salvage the moose meat," unquote. Well, so there's that. Everybody wins, except the moose.
Now wait a minute. Wait a minute. You mean this story ends with the bad guys winning?
Looks like it, Mr. Moose.
Well, that does it.
A Canadian tourist driving a rented Jeep on the Big Island of Hawaii drove straight off of a cliff at South Point at about 3:30 a.m., though the news report quickly added it was unintentional. The unnamed 27-year-old man was apparently uninjured, but the Jeep was on its roof and the driver's door was up against a rock. He decided to let himself out via the passenger door and drop straight into the surf. Presumably, that was unintentional too. The man was swept about 100 yards out to sea. The whole thing was witnessed by fishermen who called for help and assisted the man back to shore. Wow, talk about a Wile E. Coyote moment. Okay, everything in this next story is going to sound like a double entendre. As the remaining Hooters restaurant in West Virginia prepared for demolition, residents of Kanawha City gathered on February 23rd for a candlelight vigil. The event, which started as a joke, got international attention and hundreds of people showed up. Said Noah Collins of Rand, West Virginia, "It's a lot of memories going down with that building." Leave it alone. Tearful former Hooters employees reunited for one last time, said Danielle Hughart. "I started out coming in to get a job, and it became so much more because I met so many lifelong friends and my co-workers." Declared organizer Leo Browning, "This building right here was a legitimate iconic figure to the Kanawha Valley." The corporate office sent a box of calendars to distribute to those who attended the vigil. Oh, I'll just leave that one alone.
So get on up and get on down to Hooters.
Even their commercial tagline could be deemed suspicious. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our first guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, 55-year-old Laureen B. Ferrallo and 63-year-old Karen Kasbaum were charged with theft and gross abuse of a corpse after allegedly carrying out a weekend at Bernie's stunt in Ashtabula, Ohio. On March the 4th, police said Ferrallo and Kasbaum, who were not related to 80-year-old Douglas Lehman, but lived in his home, loaded his corpse into the front seat of a car in such a manner that he would be visible to bank staff, and drove to his bank where they used his card to withdraw $900. The bank had allowed the women to withdraw from his account before, as long as he was with them. Having secured the funds, the women then dropped Lehman's body at the Ashtabula County Medical Center emergency room without providing any information about the man or themselves. They were able to identify the women and question them. The women, both of whom have significant priors, said Lehman died at his home. Well, talk about ungrateful house guests.
What kind of a host invites you to his house for the weekend and dies on you?
Anyway, let's get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Marc Morton has written a lot of nonfiction, and he has written more than 100 columns about language and culture for CBC Radio. But he has taken a turn to come out with his debut YA novel called The Headmasters. Marc joins us via Skype from Kitchener, Ontario. Hi, Marc.
Hi, Peter. How are you doing?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. Now, this is your first, as I mentioned, your first YA novel. Was it a daunting prospect, or was it just another writing gig for you?
If anything, I would say it was kind of a relief because, back in the let's see, late 90s, early 2000s. I had written, as you say, for nonfiction books, and I really enjoyed doing them, but they were really grueling because I had to keep so much, information in my head at the same time. And then my wife and I adopted 4 kids, so we had, I don't know if I should call them a project, but they were sort of our project for 15 years. And so when they finally got older, and I was able to start writing again, I thought, I want to write fiction now, because we had read so many books and young adult novels to the kids that I wanted to turn my hand to that. So it really felt like a relief, or finally I can get back to this,
Now, one of the friends of the program on this show is Robert J. Sawyer, and he has given you very high praise. A brilliant science fiction debut is what Robert calls this.
Yeah, he was very kind. I think he means it. I sure hope he means it. And I was flabbergasted when I got that, because I've admired his writing for so long. Having even just one very positive blurb like that from a big, highly renowned author, that can help open doors in terms of getting publicity and things like that.
Not just a well-renowned author, but the biggest sci-fi writer in this country.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So tell us what the Headmasters is about.
Well, it's set in northern Ontario, and it's a YA dystopian novel. And so, of course, there was sort of some sort of global catastrophe that has wiped out, or seemingly wiped out, most of the people on Earth. There is a community called Blue Ring, and there's about 200 people in that. They've survived, but what has happened to them is these creatures, and I envision them as sort of plate-sized wood ticks, have attached themselves to every person's back and sort of insinuated coils into their skull and into their brain. So for about 18 hours a day, these headmasters are able to control these humans, and basically they they subjugate them. They make them do stuff for them. And the main challenge is that because they're kind of wired into these people's minds, if anybody even tries to think about getting rid of their headmaster, the headmaster will sense it and will instantly kill them. So, you can't even think about defeating them. That's their real challenge. Except for there's one, the protagonist, her name is Maple. She is able to access some information, let's say, I don't want to give too much away, that will potentially help her defeat the headmasters.
Since this is your first science fiction novel, have you always been a science fiction novel fan? And where did the seed for the story germinate from?
Yeah, I think the earliest, once I discovered science fiction when I was, I don't know, maybe 11 or 12, I read it voraciously. No, in fact, I think it would be earlier than that, because I remember one of the first books I read was by Robert Heinlein, and it was called Space Cat Goes to Mars. And there was a whole series of Space Cat novels. And I just kept reading, throughout the canon, all the Asimov and Philip K. Dick and Ursula Le Guin and et cetera, et cetera. There's so many great sci-fi authors. And in terms of where I got the idea from, it was two things. One was very concrete. I mentioned that the headmasters, I envision them as looking like big wood ticks. And that's, when I grew up in Saskatchewan on a farm, and I absolutely hated wood ticks. They would get on a person or on a dog, and then they would bite and swell up, and just horrible. So I thought, okay, what's the worst kind of alien creature I can create? A big wood tick. So that's where that came from. And then sort of the conception or the idea behind it was, wanting to create a situation in which people feel absolutely hopeless about overcoming their situation. And what got me thinking about that was, just what goes on in the world. I think I'm very lucky in my life, but there are so many people, even in North America, much more across the world, who are in hopeless situations because they're in the middle of a conflict, or displacement, or they're in an inner city, or they are indigenous people who've been, oppressed for so long. And, their situation, this feeling of hopelessness, is something that informed, my idea behind the book of creating these headmasters who are seemingly impossible to defeat.
Now, your wife is also a writer.
Yeah.
So what's it like having a two-writer household?
Well, we are very different writers, especially back when I was writing nonfiction. She has always been a poet. Her name is Melanie Cameron. She's published a couple of books of poetry. And, the nonfiction mind and the poetic mind are very, very different. But that was good because we could read each other's work and provide, a very different perspective on things. With my move to fiction, I think fiction, it's more creative than nonfiction. So I'm a bit more aligned with her writing now. But we have the same sensibilities. It can be things like we have 4 dogs, for example, and lots of people couldn't handle 4 dogs. So it's great to have a partner who loves animals as much as I do.
As writers, do you feed off each other?
Yes, and that can happen in 2 ways. One can be when we're actually sitting down and looking at each other's work or providing feedback, and the other way can just be when we're just talking about stuff and ideas come up, and she might think of something or notice something in the news and mention it to me. So yeah, it can be quite generative to have somebody like that around to share ideas with and to bounce ideas off of.
One of the things I often ask writers, especially first-time fiction writers, is when you write a book like this, do you ever envision the idea that it might become a film or a television show of some kind? And do you think about that when you write it, or is that completely off the track here?
Oh, that's such a great question, because I think that, to be a writer, my grade 11 English teacher told me this many, many decades ago. He said, if you want to be a really, really great baseball player, like a Major League Baseball player, you must believe that you are the greatest in the world. And that belief, can up your game, so to speak. So I think being a writer, one has to hope that can happen. At the same time, you got to understand that it might be a complete flop. You might not be able to find a publisher, or if you find a publisher, you get terrible reviews. So you have to be open to sort of both ends of the spectrum, and usually where one lands is, somewhere in the middle, somewhere more realistic. But yeah, certainly there have been lots of writers who have hit it big. Like shoot, her name is escaping me right now. The Harry Potter author.
Right.
She I think submitted like 30 or 40 times and got rejected from publisher after publisher until she finally hit the right one. So it's sometimes how it happens.
Well, do you, as you are writing, do you envision all of the characters and envision the creatures that are dominating the dystopian story? In other words, does your mind see this almost cinematically as you write?
It does. And like I finished another novel since I published this one. I haven't sent it out to a publisher yet. It's called The Changelings. And yeah, very much so. I see it cinematically. And I don't know, I wonder if writers 100 years ago would see the creation of their novels in the same way, but they wouldn't think of it as cinematically. Basically what I'm saying is, I see the characters in my head, I see them doing things, and what's really fun is where they start to lead me in places that I hadn't anticipated, and I'll go, oh, that's a really interesting thing. Let's kind of pursue that. So it's almost like they take on a life of their own. Sometimes I've even had dreams, at night involving characters from my books, so they can really take on a life in one's mind.
Since you mentioned school earlier, and your book title is The Headmasters.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, have you sent this particular book back to any teacher that influenced you in your high school or elementary school career?
Well, with my nonfiction books, I did that because sad to say, I'm old enough that a lot of my high school teachers have now passed on. But yeah, with my nonfiction books, I certainly did that, and I included a number of them in my acknowledgments because I was helped along the way so much. Like when I was still living on the farm and I was about 12, I wrote a little story, and I sent it to the Canadian novelist, the beloved Canadian novelist Farley Mowat. And I knew that he lived in Port Hope, Ontario, so I just put it in a letter, Farley Mowat, Port Hope, and sent it. And who would have thought that about 3 weeks later, I got a letter back from him, and he said, "This is a really good story. You are going to be a writer. You might have to throw away millions of words before that happens, but you are going to do it." Like I've got those words memorized in my head. And that was so significant for me. And same thing, after I finished my first year of university, I went down to the little weekly newspaper in my hometown of Weyburn, Saskatchewan, and the publisher there hired me. And that was a tremendous boost as well. So I thought of that a lot as we were raising our kids, because it's sometimes big things make a difference, and sometimes little things, little acts of support and encouragement can really make a big difference in somebody's life.
Well, congratulations on the book. The book is called The Headmasters. It's your debut YA novel. And thank you very much, Marc, for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Thank you, Peter. Really enjoyed this.
Marc Morton, author of his debut YA novel called The Headmasters. You can go to my website at thestufffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0760, and you'll find the link to Marc's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like. But the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/The Stuff File program. You're listening to the Stuff File program. Good times start here. Where they end up depends on how good your legal team is. Here's Peter Anthony Holder.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk to Diane Bator, who is the author of Written in Stone. Plus, Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, is back for another story, this one for the month of March. And he'll answer the question, is it a UFO or swamp gas? There's also an idiot of the day coming your way a little later on, and much more in Stuff File News, including right here, right now. And here's a story that sounds like a Benny Hill sketch. 71-year-old Anne Hughes was standing outside the Best One shop in Tontague, Wales, where she works, when the electric security shutters started raising, catching her coat and leaving her dangling upside down 7 feet in the air. The incident from March the 4th was caught on CCTV. She hung in the air until her boss, the shopkeeper, helped free her as the shutter was lowered. Said Hughes, "I'm learning to live with the fame. I'll never hear the end of it." She was uninjured in the mishap. Yeah, she's going to be an internet meme for the rest of her life. It's wonderful that her boss got her down. Then again, it was her boss that put the video up on TikTok, so anyway. I'm also assuming that he just didn't like her, hanging around. If you want to see the footage, which is hysterical, I've added it to our Stuff File Program Facebook page. And looking for something light and airy to do at the end of April? Well, then set your GPS for Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the Crafton Ingram Lanes, where Balls Out Bowling will return on April the 28th. The Pittsburgh area naturalists are hosting the event, which requires nudity, except women are allowed to wear bottoms if they so desire. Participants must be 18 or older, and sexual activity is not permitted. Harassment will result in being ejected from the bowling alley. So, if you're a bad bowler, only your bowling ball can be in the gutter, not your mind. And leave your cell phone at home, no photos or videos allowed. You won't have anywhere to carry it anyway. I'm sure that some people will still have to rent those nasty shoes, though. I'm also sure there's one guy who will always be straddling the hand dryer. There's a guy in Delhi, India, who thought he could build his body by taking zinc. So he took some. Then he found out he could not eat, and he was retching. He went to an emergency room where his family revealed how he had taken the zinc, by swallowing zinc-containing coins along with magnets to hold them in place. He had pursued his regime for at least 20 days. An X-ray confirmed the presence of coin and magnet-shaped objects in the patient's gut, and surgery revealed that magnets in 2 loops of his small intestine were drawing the loops together. The intestines were opened and the coins were taken out. Coins and magnets had to be surgically removed from the 26-year-old's stomach as well. I'd ask him for a penny for his thoughts, but clearly he's not a thinker. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our next guest, here on this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, 2 unruly passengers caused a United Airlines flight to make an emergency stop in Maine. According to federal court documents, the FBI got word that United Airlines Flight 883 from London to Newark, New Jersey, reported a passenger was non-compliant and the captain diverted to Bangor. Alexander McDonald was arguing with his girlfriend at the back of the plane and began yelling at a flight attendant a few minutes later. McDonald allegedly threatened to mess up the plane and shove someone on the flight. Flight crew and passengers restrained him. McDonald is facing charges of interference with flight crew or attendant and assault. United Airlines say both McDonald and his girlfriend appeared to be intoxicated at the time of the incident, and both of them will be banned from future United flights while they review the matter. Alex McDonald's banned from flights, E-I-E-I-O. United Airlines has had the same commercial tagline since the 60s.
By the friendly skies of United.
They no longer mean you, Alexander McDonald. Anyway, let's get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Diane Bator is the author of Written in Stone. It's the first novel in her latest mystery series. Diane joins us via Skype from Alberta. Hi, Diane.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. Now, I understand that the protagonist in this book is a person who is dreaming of becoming a best-selling romance novelist. So I'm just curious, since you're writing about a writer, how much of Allison is actually you?
There's probably a fair bit. I mean, I've been a writer for a very long time. I've got several books out there, and best-selling author would be a great thing to put on there. But Allison's also a romance writer, which I'm sort of dabbling in, but I haven't actually published a romance book yet. So I've been doing mystery for the last 10 to 12 years. So
now, as I said, you have several mystery series. This is the first one in this particular mystery series, but you have more than one mystery series. So how do you go about deciding that a book is a one-off or if it's a series? And if it's a series, how many books are in that series? How do you differentiate that?
That's kind of a hard one. I have this issue with writing one book and then leaving the characters. I always like to know what happens to them next. And I always find ways to get them in more and more trouble. One of my series, which one was it? The Sugarwood Mysteries takes place in Ontario. And it kind of started as a one-off. And then pretty soon I'm like, well, I could do this to them. And then pretty soon it's a series. So there's 2 in that series, and I'm working on that one again soon. So
tell us about the story of Written in Stone.
Allison has memory issues. She's been on medication her whole life, but she really doesn't know why. And having dinner with her mom one night, with her mom and her sister, she discovers that her father, who she thought was long dead, is still alive. And in around the same time, she gets an invitation to go to Vancouver Island to become a writer in residence at one of the libraries and stay at this place called Thistlewood Manor. And when she arrives there, she has this really bizarre sense of deja vu. She has done some research and knows her father was last in that area. And bit by bit, she starts to put things together and discovers a family she didn't know she had.
Wow. That sounds very intriguing.
It was definitely a lot of fun to write.
I can imagine. Now, since you have so many different series out, have you ever thought of amalgamating a situation where there are more than one protagonist from your various series in the same book?
Because before I was writing for a publisher, it wasn't something that kind of came up and wasn't something that was really encouraged. But now, as of January, I've kind of gone off on my own. So all of my books are currently, they're still up on sites, but they're not available for purchase just yet. I am redoing a whole bunch of things. And there may come a point in different series where different characters do kind of go wandering into somebody else's territory, and we'll see what happens with that, because I have a lot of very strong women who are very nosy.
It sounds like with the characters that you've had and that were done with other publishers, it sounds like you've become the Taylor Swift of books, because she is re-recording all of her music, and you seem to be, repopulating your own characters, taking them back.
Absolutely. I kind of had a falling out with my publisher. Like I said, I'd been with them for 10 years and just kind of got to the point that I just wanted to take control of my own work. So that's what I'm in the process of doing. And Written in Stone is actually my first book that I'm self-publishing, and fingers and toes and everything crossed that it does really well. So it's a really fun book, and it's a lot of suspense and a tiny bit of romance and a lot of mystery.
The freedom to have your characters be your own and to take them back, so to speak, and to work this way after working so many years the other way under the thumb of a publisher, does it free you as a writer while you're writing?
Absolutely. I mean, the publisher I was with, they deal mostly with mystery. They do a little bit of romance and historical topics. And there are certain things they would not publish. So I do have a couple of books on the back burner that I've just kind of left there because it wasn't something that appealed to them. And, I was working on all of these books. Like when I first started working on the books, my kids were still quite small. And now that they're grown and gone, I kind of have a little more time to myself to go, okay, well, I can play with these and I can do fresh edits on everything, update everything. And just, if I want to tweak things a certain way, I have the freedom now to do that.
As a writer who creates different series of mysteries, and has different protagonists with each series. When you're starting a new one, like when you're writing this particular character, Allison, are you cognizant of the idea of, okay, I can't give her some of the personality or some of the situations that one of my other characters have had? How do you make them as individual as possible without not necessarily repeating yourself, but drawing some of the personality from other characters that you've done in the past?
I think sometimes you kind of do that unconsciously. And because a lot of the characteristics are characteristics of the writer themselves, and including myself, there are certain little tics or whatever that I'm like, oh, that's me. What am I doing? So I that's one of the things I'm kind of looking for as I go back as well and going, okay, well, I have to, kind of sharpen this character a little bit or soften this one, or okay, they don't need to be this way. They can kind of change them up a little bit. So that's one of the other things I'm looking for as I go back. But it's always kind of fun creating. Last summer, I created a whole new character for a different publisher. We do a lot of anthologies. And this character is just one of those that everybody kind of wants that freedom sometimes to just say whatever's at the top of your head and do whatever you feel like doing. She's kind of one of those characters, but she does have her limits. So she's been a lot of fun to work with as well.
When your friends and family read your books, do they find in the protagonist, do they say, oh, that's definitely Diane? In other words, has someone come up to you and said that a particular character is so much you when you yourself didn't even realize that you had written that in the character, so to speak?
My favorite example for that is Gilda Wright in my Gilda Wright mysteries, because my kids tease me about being Gilda. I actually worked as a receptionist in a karate school, which is what Gilda does. And she, definitely has a few of my little quirks. And the kids would tease me all the time. Oh, Gilda, you're working on your memoir or whatever they wanted to say. It was really kind of funny. But they're all quite happy and proud of me, and they want to know how all these things are going, and they want to read all my books, and they think it's so cool when they can tell their friends, well, my mom's a mystery writer. So
with Written in Stone, this is the first novel, as I said, in a new mystery series. When you decide to create a new mystery series, do you have an idea how many stories Allison will be in? Or is it just you go along and write the first one and you get ideas for the second one and so on and so forth?
It depends. For this particular series, right now I have 3 books in mind. So I kind of have them not completely laid out, but I have ideas for all of them. And I've already actually started writing the second one just when I have quiet time here and there. My first series, Wild Blue Mysteries, I really hadn't put a cap on it. I just kind of was, well, let's see where it goes and where it takes me. That series ended up at 6. And I left loopholes in the 6th book that if I want to go back, and like you said, if I want to bring in characters from a different series, I can do that. I still have that little opening that I left.
Well, congratulations on being such a prolific writer. Many series, multiple series. The new one it features Allison, and this one is called Written in Stone. It's just out. Diane, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Oh, thank you, Peter. This was great.
Diane Bator, author of Written in Stone. You can go to my website at thestufffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0760, and you'll find the link to Diane's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order her book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestufffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestufffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Hey, how would you like to become a patron of the Stuff File program? It's easy to do. By going to patreon.com and becoming a patron, you help to make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. And if you become a regular patron, as a Patreon reward, I'll share with you an electronic version of my book, Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. You've heard me say on many occasions about the myriad of celebrities I've had the chance to talk to that are contained in my book, which is published by Bear Manor Media. You've also heard me mention that some of the celebrities in my book, and many others, can be heard on our page at patreon.com. If you've been on the fence about joining Patreon, let me try to pull you over to our side. Join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, my interviews with two men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. Sign up at patreon.com/The Stuff File program.
Coming to you from the outskirts of sanity, this is the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
And still to come on the program, Marc Hartzman from WeirdHistorian.com will be back on the show to talk about swamp gas, or is it UFOs? We also have an Idiot of the Day coming your way a little later on, and more Stuff File news right here, right now. After several years as manager, 50-year-old Molly Christine Cox suddenly quit her job at a Dunkin' Donuts store in Largo, Florida, when the owner started an audit of the books. The audit showed more than $153,000 was missing. Cox was the person responsible for making the deposits and was shown on surveillance video leaving with the deposits. More damning, her own bank accounts showed significant amounts of deposits into her accounts from sources other than payroll. She allegedly told a detective she took some of the deposits, but not all of them, because some of the extra income was from her boyfriend's narcotics sales. Wow. She was booked into jail, charged with felony grand theft. You know, I'm also sure that said detective will have a word or two with Molly's boyfriend. I almost made her the Idiot of the Day because that's just dumb volunteering that information. But anyway, I did not. We'll get to that later. Meanwhile, Spanish artist Alicia Framis, now based in Amsterdam, has created the perfect husband, a hologram that she designed and named AI Lex Sibouwingen, whom she modeled on past paramours. Framis plans to marry him this summer at a museum in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. On her Instagram page, Framis shares photos and videos of herself and AI Lex sharing meals and other elements of daily life. She said, "Love and sex with robots and holograms are an inevitable reality. They are great companions and capable of expressing empathy." You know, as weird as this story is, I can think of a weirder follow-up. Remember those past paramours whom she modeled this hologram on? Let's wait and see if any of them sue for breach of intellectual property. Stay tuned. Anyway, let's get to our last guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, is back with a story for the month of March. This time, he answers the burning question: is it a UFO or is it just swamp gas? Marc joins us via Skype from New York. Hi, Marc.
Hi, Peter. How you doing?
Just tickety-boo. So I'm guessing that this is a story from your most recent book called We Are Not Alone, The Extraordinary History of UFOs and Aliens Invading Our Hopes, Fears, and Fantasies. Would that be correct?
That's correct. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so what is the answer? Is it a UFO or is it just swamp gas?
Oh, definitely swamp gas. No, this was a big problem. So this was a case that happened in Michigan, and it was a series of UFO sightings beginning on March 14th, 1966. And they were being investigated by Dr. J. Allen Hynek. So quick little background, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, he was the chief scientific investigator for Project Blue Book, and that was the Air Force's program to investigate UFO sightings from the late 40s up until 1969. So he was in charge, as the astronomer, to kind of inspect all these cases, interview witnesses as much as he could. He had a small team working with him, and they would try to resolve what these were, if they could identify it as some sort of natural phenomena, a weather phenomena, whatever it might be. Oftentimes that might be something like it was the planet Venus that you saw, or it was a weather inversion, trying to find some sort of astronomical or meteorological effect that might explain away what people thought was a UFO.
Right.
So in this particular case, as I said, the sightings were in Michigan, and there were more than 100 witnesses, and they saw these glowing objects that were drifting in the sky. They were zigzagging across, and they were hovering above these swampy hollows that were near Ann Arbor in Hillsdale. And again, this was going on for several nights. And they had, respectable witnesses. One of them was one of the county deputies who said, this was one of his quotes that I have in the book. He said, "We come over that knoll just this side of the swamp, and there it was, about eye level with us, no more than 500 yards away. It had a blue light in front, and in the back, a light that kept changing from red to white, like it was rotating, like the light of a police car." And there were a bunch of these kinds of reports. And so Hynek goes out, he investigates, he spent several days interviewing these witnesses. Everyone's kind of nervous about, like, what's going on, what's in our skies, what kind of UFOs are visiting us. There's a lot of these kinds of reports going on at that time across the country. So Hynek, he came up with an explanation. It was kind of his job. He was expected to find explanations. And just for the record, there were many cases that he did not have an explanation for. Often, well, not often, but there were more than 700 cases of the 12,000 Project Blue Book investigated that were left unknown. So definitely some mystery left here. But Hynek did find lots of different kinds of explanations. In this case, he said, because again, it was going over these swampy hollows, he said a dismal swamp is a most unlikely place for a visit from outer space. It is not a place where a helicopter would hover for several hours or where a soundless secret device would likely be tested.
Well, it's interesting.
So
you said it's not a place that UFOs would most likely visit. What is he basing that on?
Well, yes, it might be subjective.
Exactly.
Maybe aliens love swampy areas. They were craving swamps. They didn't have enough swamps where they came from. They may have been swamp things for all we know.
Exactly.
So yes, a fair point for sure. But Hynek, he had a sliver of an explanation here. He said that springtime thawing would release trapped gases that resulted from, quote, rotty vegetation. So, in other words, he was saying that there was this illusion of saucers that was being created by swamp gas. And he said, I emphasize, I cannot prove in a court of law that this is the full explanation of these sightings. So he was acknowledging, might not be all related to swamp gas. But he said it appears very likely, however, that the combination of the conditions of this particular winter, an unusually mild one in this area, and the particular weather conditions were such as to have produced this unusual and puzzling display. So that was his big announcement. And that did not go over well.
Well, I was about to ask, how was it? What was the reaction?
Yeah, people didn't like that. These were people who, they knew what they saw. They didn't see swamp gas. So there's one quote I have here from one of the police officers who saw 4 of these objects over a farm. Again, he was pretty sure of what he saw. And he said, "It's not marsh gas. My reaction to Dr. Hynek is the same as the rest of the people around here. He made us look like fools." So people were not happy about this. So eventually Hynek kind of said, "All right, look, maybe I made a mistake calling it swamp gas. I wasn't trying to say everything was swamp gas." But it became a thing where, he said it became like a household term where it became a synonym, a humor synonym for anything we just wanted to explain away with no idea. So, it must be swamp gas. So it kind of became a thing. But it did create a bigger issue with this whole UFO phenomena. So Michigan, one of Michigan's representatives and the future president of the United States, Gerald Ford, he was kind of tired of these explanations coming out of the Air Force. So he called for a congressional inquiry into the UFO phenomena. He thought that people deserved better explanations for what they were reporting. So on March 26th that same year, just a few weeks later, he told the press, he said, at week's end, the Air Force explained away the UFOs as a product of college student pranks, swamp gas, the rising crescent moon, and the planet Venus. But the Air Force has been explaining away UFOs for years, and I don't believe the American people generally are satisfied with its statements. For that reason, I have proposed that there be a congressional investigation of UFOs. So that led to the first congressional hearing of the UFO phenomena. And that investigation then led to what's called the Condon Report, conducted by Edward Condon out of the University of Colorado, which became like a 1,000-page report. And they went through many cases in there. But basically, they ended up recommending that the Air Force shut down Project Blue Book, that there was no real reason to continue it. So essentially, swamp gas led to the closing of Project Blue Book, if you kind of connect the events in that way. And therefore, they stopped looking into it seriously, and really only until the past few years has it been taken seriously again.
Well, assuming that it is or was swamp gas or some explanation that made actual sense, did the situations that developed to create that, have they not recreated themselves through the years, or was it just a one-off phenomenon at the time, and we haven't seen so-called lights like that could be swamp gas?
So there were lots of different phenomena that were seen, lots of different objects seen. Some of them were picked up by radar. This was the one. I don't think he called others. Are you asking if he called others swamp gas in the past?
Yeah, like in other words, has anybody seen what he described as swamp gas since then?
Oh, since then?
Yeah.
Oh, not that I know of. I haven't heard of swamp gas being mistaken for UFOs for a second time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think this was I think after this, people stopped thinking swamp gas might be flying saucers or aliens.
Because you also mentioned
there's other things.
You also mentioned that it was the product of potential college student pranks. When you mentioned Ann Arbor earlier, the first thing that came to my mind was, okay, there's several universities around that area, and there are certain fraternities and certain keg nights. I'm sure that depending upon the situations, there are some people who could see the aurora borealis and say they're UFOs, depending upon how much alcohol was involved.
Yeah, that's true. Certainly there could be cases like that. And there were certainly cases of pranks also over the years of people creating things that people then thought were actual UFOs. So that's certainly not, something that hadn't happened before. But I think that the number of witnesses were beyond just college kids, because you're right, there could be that kind of situation. But I think there were a lot more people that were more credible and that were serious about it and were certain that they weren't drunk, they weren't seeing things, they saw something they couldn't explain. But they were pretty sure it wasn't gas from a swamp.
So did Dr. Hynek spend the rest of his career being vilified? Was he the early day, for lack of a better term, Dr. Fauci, or was he down the road?
Hynek,
Go ahead.
He took a lot of flack for that, but basically after that. So, like I said, he'd been doing this since the late 40s, and early on he was skeptical, but he started to be much more open and receptive to there might be, there being something out there. The more people he spoke with, he found many of them to be very genuine in their beliefs and what they believed they saw. And like I said, there were a lot of cases that were unexplained. So he started to think, well, maybe there really is something to this and we should take it more seriously. So after Project Blue Book closed, he didn't stop. He continued to investigate the phenomena. He started a different organization, his own organization called the Center for UFO Studies, which is called CUFOS, which is still around, and continued to investigate UFO cases with a much more open mind. He's actually the guy who coined the classification term. If anyone's seen the classic movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, he came up with the Close Encounters system. The first kind, the second kind, third kind, fourth kind, so on. So that was all Dr. Hynek. In fact, he's actually in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. One of the characters is based on him, and then he makes a cameo at the end of the movie. So he's had a pretty significant role in UFOs in a fairly positive way.
Fascinating story indeed, and one, as I said earlier, that can be found in your book, We Are Not Alone, The Extraordinary History of UFOs and Aliens Invading Our Hopes, Fears, and Fantasies. Thank you very much, Marc, for this story. It's a great story.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Peter.
Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com. He's the author of several books, his most recent one being We Are Not Alone, The Extraordinary History of UFOs and Aliens Invading Our Hopes, Fears, and Fantasies. And, of course, that story he just told came from his latest book. You can go to my website at thestuffwall.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0760, and you'll find the link to Marc's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. Well, boys and girls, it's that moment you've all been waiting for. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the strange things adults do. The Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
You know, we eventually might have to create a new subcategory of Idiot of the Day and call it Social Media Division, because there have been a rash of them of late. Here's the latest one. 2 teens in California broke into an unfinished billion-dollar NBA arena in the middle of the night, even shooting some hoops for the world and outraged local officials to see on social media. The juveniles entered the Intuit Dome, the future home of the Clippers in Inglewood, California, when they climbed an orange work ladder outside the construction grounds in what became the over 90-second TikTok video posted. The brazen duo recorded themselves strolling around the empty stadium's hallways and bleachers, then shooting baskets on an uncompleted court. The video shows that one suspect, who wore Los Angeles Lakers pajama pants and Crocs, used work buckets to try a slam dunk before he sprayed a fire extinguisher at the hoop. They then were seen climbing up onto the bridge and the rafters before making their way onto the roof. From there, the teens posted for the camera, again showing their faces, and took panoramic shots of the city's skyline before the video ended. Doubling down on their illicit activities, they even captioned the video breaking into Clippers Stadium and hashtagged the Clippers, Lakers, and LeBron James. By the way, the same 2 clowns are seen on video sneaking into Dodger Stadium last August and recorded themselves on the field, this time in broad daylight. Now, why, oh why, would you basically vandalize a $2 billion construction site for the sake of a TikTok video and also hashtag the Clippers, Lakers, and LeBron James to boot? One reason, and one reason only. You're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0760. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestufffile.com, and once again, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links on all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0760. Email me at peter@thestufffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Spoutable, Post, Mastodon, on Blue Sky as PA Holder. Check us out on patreon.com, where you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including KDXRadio.com, TrueTalkRadio.com, over the air on World FM in New Zealand, WLSLLP-FM in Dade City, Florida, KZZHLP-FM in Eureka, California, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, Local 107.3 FM in St. John, CHSR in Fredericton, and also streaming on just about any streaming service your little heart desires. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. I'm your humble announcer, Ben Patrick Johnson. Don't let Peter fool you. This program will be nothing without me. What you hear in the rest of the show isn't even Peter's real voice. It's all special effects. His actual voice has officially been deemed as torture by the Geneva Convention.